This world is ravaged by hundreds of savages that terrorize, murder, and enslave good people just trying to get by. I want to save them by destroying every threat in just 6 years. But that'll involve frantically growing a strike force in a game that punishes reckless growth, all on blood and dust difficulty without using cheap kill boxes or traps. This video is sponsored by Paradox Arc and their game Spaaaaace. I'll have an ad read for that midway through the video. The story that unfolds as the former slaves Murillo, Glenn, and Right Guard try to keep a promise to a dead friend isn't just about getting due bloody vengeance or the huge battles fought for freedom. It is about turning the chilly swamp they hide away in into a beacon of hope for the world's downtrodden that befriends and helps everyone they can. But first, they have to avoid being crushed by the slavers still looking for them. Hunting the local wildlife affords them the first real meals they've had in years while they burrow into the mountains. Building outdoors or even a proper farm would draw way too much attention, and Murillo, who's great with plants and animals, instead disguises a few modest patches around the local area before chopping only the odd tree here and there to avoid visible signs of logging. A few visitors arrive, and they say they're from the nearby Society of Anderson. And they're even generous enough to overlook that Right Guard, the researcher and social expert, who managed to grab a gun and save his friends, is naked as he talks to them. They ask what the settlement's called, and Right Guard just asks them, what settlements? Right Guard researches recurve bows, just in case the departing roamers tell the slavers about what they found, while his friends expand the base and turn it into a home. Unfortunately, neither goal is done before the first scout from the slavers wanders by. It's unclear how they found this place, but Right Guard and Murillo are able to ambush them in the swamp and protect their secret. Still, the slavers will eventually notice their hunters go missing and start sending bigger forces. Or perhaps they'll hear rumors some beggars in need of medicine spread about the helpful people living in the swamp. Though that still won't stop Right Guard from giving them what they need to keep their own story going just a little longer. Murillo and Glenn, who is a good miner, cook, and crafter, make simple bedrooms and larger workplaces in the mountain, including a shrine at which a startlingly ugly face of justice, and boy is that an omen, is used to denote Right Guard as the official loyalizer for the cause. He also starts overseeing defenses, though since proper ones would again arouse suspicion, they instead drag boulders into conveniently shaped formations, hoping that the slavers will miss them when they hide behind. They're not really needed to kill the next slaver that wanders into the marsh. Not having any more recruits yet is a little bit worrying, and the apparently dramatic Right Guard swears that he needs a cape and a mask to fulfill his job as the loyalizer. Perhaps it does work though, since he almost immediately gets a call from a slave that snuck a message out from their desert camp. He and Murillo head there as soon as possible to save them, while Glenn is left to save a stranger that was left behind after her trade caravan got into a social fight, then headed out. Right Guard and Murillo arrive at the coordinates they found and creep up on the settlement there. This is just some small, independent slaver, but their attempt to sneak Gynecomb out fails, and they're forced to ambush the person responsible to free her. Gynecomb, frankly, is not great, since she's a bit primitive, is only good with plants that aren't able to be grown in mass yet, and refuses to do dumb labor. But there is no way that the trio weren't going to save another slave, and Gynecomb can begin hunting the local area to become a great shot in time. They add a biofuel refinery to work towards more covert power generation, and an electric stove to use it. But it isn't long before they can again improve the Rimworld, this time by saving a caravan from some raiders in a few days, and heading out to disrupt a logging camp the slavers set up till then. It's probably for the best that Glenn was left behind, since her unwanted daughter is here. The soldiers have to shoot her down, and while she lives and could be saved, she's unwaveringly loyal, so they'll tell Glenn that her daughter turned on the slavers in the end and died saving Murillo from another guard. After they loot the place in return, the caravan's assailants are nice enough to arrive one at a time and are easily shot down for it. That gives everyone time to work on a pantry, to unwind with the book they got for saving the caravan, and for Murillo and Glenn to announce that they're getting together. The area's plentiful components are mined out to continue adding more electronics, in this case a place for Glenn to hone her crafting skills. Turning hides from plentiful hunting into valuables that can be sold will help get her ready to make the advanced armor needed for eventual fights, and also offer them a good way to make money, though an intermediary electric smithy to make some simple plate armor isn't ready before the next challenge arrives. The Popomix are an aggressive group of pigmen that prey on weaker settlements, looking for their next screaming feast. They brought real guns and firebombs, forcing Gynec home to join the other soldiers in fighting back. It isn't fulfilling work, but it does help Right Guard feel a little more confident about what might happen if a larger force of slavers arrive, though he still continues trying to understand how to better machine more advanced guns all the time. Gynec home, though, is a little bit of a problem. She refuses to be talked around and starts social fights all the time, leading to constant minor injuries and bickering. The next recruit is far better. Hammer is a fantastic soldier that was a slaver that crashed here, but they're saved and will be converted in time. Production around the base explodes even further when some temporary hands in need of shelter and food offer to help build, beautify, and supply the base. They help add a hydroponic center, then get rid of some roofs to allow a little natural light in to minimize the visible footprint needed to feed 8 people. Though keeping them fed is apparently not enough, and an enraged Fuda beats a prisoner. Thank you, Rimworld, for giving me the chance to make Google hear me say that sentence. Even though Hammer was a slaver, Fuda is arrested, and that show of mercy helps win them around before Glenn's inspired recruiting convinces them and their fashionable scarf to join the cause. More soldiers are always appreciated. The hundreds of enemies they'll face need a strong and well-equipped army to be beaten back, and work continues towards that as time slowly ticks away. Glenn's done the most work here and officially becomes the place's leader to oversee productivity and help by giving rousing speeches before fights. One of the vagabonds that's helped for a few days now even wants to join up, but they're a Neanderthal like the problematic Gynec home and wouldn't be a good fit for what's needed, so they're turned down. The place is already being hunted barren to feed everyone, and hands that won't help in the mission can't be afforded for long. The second year's crisp spring nights pass peacefully as a machining table is built to make the first line of industrial weapons for less peaceful times. The Wanderers see the warning signs those convey and leave while they still can. That doesn't stop work from continuing though, and it isn't long before Right Guard picks up a heavy SMG to pack a little bit more punch than his trusty bolt-action rifle. That budding warmth also allows Murillo and Gynec home to plant a little bit more before everyone celebrates a full year here with what'll be an annual party. It's both a celebration of what they've managed to accomplish and a reaffirmment of what they plan to do. One they almost immediately prove by offering sanctuary to more refugees. It's nice to help, but it is worrying that everyone seems to realize where we are. Surely it can't be long before the slavers hear rumors and follow close behind. To prepare for that, the penultimate room is turned into a research hub that focuses on guns that are yet more advanced. A few components need to be mined for those, but before that's done, a trader arrives and sells a few horses for some of the clothes that Glenn has made, which brings an interesting problem. Everyone's avoided arousing attention till now, chopping only a tree here or there, limiting how long and what they do outside, but the horses that'll be so helpful in roving out need grazing grounds. It's a tough decision, but with Glenn making weapons on par with what the slavers have, and working on autocannon turrets in the research lab, well, they realize that now is a time to be a little more bold. Growing to crush the slavers will eventually require making moves, and while they aren't declaring war just yet, perhaps the slavers will miss a subtle wall shaped like the mountain itself. Well, that's too much to hope for. Even if they didn't make moves themselves, trouble was coming soon regardless. The duo of newcomers hear that yet more advanced weapons are imminent, and reveal that they are not former slaves, but instead active slavers. They try to ambush everyone. It's a good thing that Reichgard sprinted towards better guns, because the chain shotgun he put in Marilla's hands handles well in the tight spaces. The battle's won, but the handheld radios on the men's corpses cannot mean anything good. Indeed, a horde of imps coerced to attack what settlement in exchange for a captured friend follows soon after. But the marsh and their bows don't give them the safety they need to advance enough to let their fire breaths dominate the fight. Of those that survived, Vilayov is a decent shot, a much-needed builder, and a great crafter, so they're captured for conversion, while others are allowed to be swallowed by the swamp. It's an unfortunate reality the Rimworld forces you to accept. Defenses are built, and assault rifles are crafted for scarier threats. Sterile tiles and hospital beds are installed to help treat the results of all that future fighting, since losing even one or two critical members could spell doom for the mission. Food supplies remain touch and go into the hottest days of summer too, necessitating bigger hunting trips after less dangerous prey are cleared off the map, even though those sometimes put Gynecomb down. But though bigger threats do loom over the dawn, reclaiming at least some land outside of the cave hiding most of the base means that geothermal power near the horse pens can finally be considered. Just having the facilities for productive people is not enough though. They need to be kept happy, or one poorly timed tantrum could ruin everything. And so builders smooth stone to improve bedrooms, work on a rec room, and simultaneously finish out a hospital in the first room the original three carved. The first proper harvest helps diversify their diets, showing that while the sailing isn't necessarily smooth, it is picking up. Vilayov the prisoner is brought around and converted, willing to help against the slavers that sent them and their friends to their deaths. After changing to something a little less raidery, they start working as a crafter. Glenn is just a little too busy cooking, and the place needs a constant stream of clothes made to sell for other items. But it isn't all smooth sailing. More imps arrive, desperate to get their friend back from the slavers. Instead, they find a thick marsh and the thicker smell of blood in the air. The trash chokers, the prime faction responsible for all of this, need to be stopped, but we still aren't even close to being able to give them due justice. Instead, what settlement first has to stand as a beacon, an ideal? Spreading news that they've found a long-lost artifact is a good way to do that. And so Reichgard says that they won't go after the raiders until they can do something that should be comparatively simple. The soldiers set about trying to find information on one, which unfortunately does provoke some primitive tribals angry about the perceived slight. The soldiers flee instead of causing yet more deaths, but they'll continue going out on these missions every once in a while. Between those journeys, and having to tend to hunting and harvest, the base grows messy as the pantries grow fuller. The rec room is finally planned out properly, more crash pod victims are able to be saved, and the first proper steel plate armor is made to keep those soldiers safe now that they're finding themselves in more fights. And I feel like I'm repeating myself, but people really like to crash their pods here. This one is a good soldier though, and so Reichgard's not too upset about it. They even agree to join the cause almost immediately, proving that there are still good souls out there. It's just, sometimes those good souls have to sell the equivalent of cocaine they made to afford mortar barrels. Hopefully the pawns can take their minds off of silly little ethical questions, like if causing addictions is really that bad, by chilling in the lovely rec room, built to help their moods and help them build relationships with each other. It's also a nice place to take refuge from the slavers' latest attacks, which involve crashing a radiation-leaking ship here. Though it thankfully misses, it's clear that they're responding to what settlement more and more dramatically. Beggars arrive and are given silver to buy back their friends, raising concerns of whether we're funding the slave trade. But at least the growing population in the settlement itself means that the other mountain has to be mined into for more bedrooms. It's a very good sign, as is the fact that the next piece of info on the relic is in an abandoned facility easily looted without issue. The home is besieged by angry cats that force everyone inside until the returning soldiers can save them, but that just gives them time to catch up on the shows they've been missing. The fiery explosion of yet another transport pod crash in the marsh brings Ola, and friendly faces in the nice hospital convince her to join up, even if she won't be a good soldier. Still, she's a gentle soul and a talented artist that can beautify the place to make it nicer for everyone else. Keeping them happy is a bit of a problem right now, and their expectations still aren't as high as they'll be in time. The slavers' larger assaults do mean that the settlement can push out and abandon that sense of subtlety that constrained them so, but the geothermal generator will fuel needed growth, while wild animal attacks help continue filling the pantry. Winter passes quickly as outsiders are brought around, hearts are broken, and more information about the relic is found. The marshy entrance is just the right size for autocannon turrets to cover, though they can't yet be afforded, so Rightguard builds a comms console to try and snag needed material for that, and for the microanalyzer, gatekeeping research from a trading ship passing nearby. Though Winter's troubles are not over. A mood spirals Stemmy's work and threatens worse, but it's the mechanoid cluster called down that might destroy the base. This one is fortunately dormant until someone wanders nearby, though it's still a terrifying threat they'll have to face soon, and Rightguard orders a mortar encampment be built and stocked with fresh ammo made at the machining table. It isn't used until spring arrives, and the now yearly Festival of Fun marks almost 2 full years here. It, and the fully completed rec room, might even fix the ongoing problem with moods, though the mechs may re-dampen spirits. Glenn makes an EMP launcher that Gynacum grabs for the fight, and everyone, minus Hammer, whose genetic psychite dependence puts him in a coma until we can grow more, gets in position so the first mortar shot can hit a high shield that stops it. Gynacum's EMP launcher has to do the job, but the much smaller blasts leave a lot of mechs able to shoot back. Incendiary beams make a mockery of cover and scatter soldiers that return shots to slowly pick them off. Rightguard has to stop shooting to tend to a gravely injured Vilav, but in the end, they win, and everyone just barely pulls through with some nasty new scars. Rightguard even collapses and has to be saved on the way back, so it's unsurprising that moods continue to be dire even as spring continues. There are opportunities to roam out and sabotage enemies at their supply camps, but the settlement instead has to hunker down and fix their own problems, including expanding crop production and welcoming a trader's good deals. They even buy some psychite used to revive Hammer, and gold used to build the much-needed multi-analyzer. Soldiers head out to handle a fiery, though not problematic facility containing some of the last information on the pole bond, that relic they seek to make a statement. And while soldiers are abroad, those left stockpile more mortar shells, build encampments for guns, and greet another mech cluster. This one doesn't have a high shield, thankfully, and the mortar is able to honestly just get a bit of dirt on them. Incendiary shells do similarly little, except provoke the centipede closer, although that does actually make it easy to ambush with a well-placed EMP shot and a flurry of bullets that exposes the core to a further deluge. They won't finish the cluster's turret just yet, since the EMP launcher isn't with those nearby though. Instead, they gear up for a very important trip, and even bring a horse to carry their supplies for the first time. The pole bond has been found, and only more mechs stand in the way. The outer guards are ambushed and picked off without more than some minor injuries. Ambushing the inner ones doesn't go as well at first, but they're able to pull back and tend to their wounds. After a short time recovering, they ambush the other two, and finally recover the pole bond, marking a true start to being a beacon of hope and a powerhouse, able to fight back after just 2 years have passed. Vilaov decides to celebrate by indulging her pyromaniac tendencies, including to the mortar ammo, which I'm starting to think shouldn't be next to the hospital. That's in stark contrast to Murillo, who returns from recovering the pole bond and needs to be in a hospital as soon as possible. Unfortunately, a little wander near that turret that never got cleaned up because it slipped the mind means that he has to be saved with a little stun and run. He's treated in a field hospital. That means he won't die to his wounds or the subsequent infection, nor will Reichgard when he picks up one tending to the man. Unfortunately, Pete's guilt and struggles catch up. The man breaks and wanders near the turret that's still there. Hammer arrives to stun the machine and save him, but the flu Pete refused treatment for while wandering is exacerbated by the wounds and does him in, marking what settlement's first death so shortly after they thought they were advancing. He'll be buried in a monument built opposite the main base, and Hammer and Vilaov team up to finally defeat the charge turret, even if it does get one final laugh in and finishes sending half the settlement to the ground. Mechs, what seem to be our main enemy right now, are terrifying, and it's a little surprise that the hospital is full through a stormy night that doesn't quite obscure the sound of Murillo's screaming tantrum. Unlocking fabrication and beginning on yet more advanced guns is a needed step forward, but ignoring the actual issues they currently face to rapidly chug towards strength needed to save the world continues taking a toll on their spirits. Progress is quick, but without the needed advanced components to actually make them, that research is largely useless, and so they undertake a mission, baiting over an insect swarm in exchange for some of those advanced components. The thin hulls are not good for fighting these, but their pincers luckily struggle to break through strong steel armor, and they're eventually gunned down without causing more than easily handled minor wounds. The advanced components that bought, plus simpler ones recycled from an unneeded generator, are used to build a fabrication bench, while stockpiled stone is spent expanding the temple and pantry to continue supporting what is thankfully a growing force. Unfortunately, none of the weapons are ready before even more mechs arrive. Turrets without walls inhibiting their lines of sight and a high shield guarding them are terrifying, and the soldiers are still recovering from wounds the bugs gave them. The frequency that these things land here hints at something more malicious, though this one is at least based on a proximity activator that means cover can be safely built, or a wild man can wander through. I'm not saying I'm happy they're dying, but we're not rushing to save them either. The Inferno turret is even close enough to rain shots down on the base itself, and fires rage into the night. People cower inside while recovering, though that doesn't stop them from throwing a party. Maybe a end of the world one? The hospital is eventually emptied, and soldiers head out the long way to enter from some ruins so that they're mostly unseen. Even peeking out to try and EMP it is dangerous, so a sniper baits fire while further away, so that Vilaov can actually stun it with a launcher. The others peek out and pour shots into it, while cover takes most of the smaller Fio and Inferno shots back, and an explosion eventually clears out most of the mechs. They pull back to heal, but night falls and the rain coaxes most back into the base to avoid mental breaks like exactly that. Hammer fortunately wanders past the shots and back into the base before a good mortar shot takes out the turret and lets Murillo destroy the last of it without opposition, but with aim that would make a stormtrooper blush. Some better weapons would help, but they need yet more advanced components still being used for other improvements around the base, like an even more needed vitals monitor in the hospital. Those advances in technology don't save Murillo from having to harvest crops amidst a howling thunderstorm, which ticks him off enough that he even starts a social fight with his ex-wife Glenn. It's especially unfortunate timing given that he and Reitgard escort her off to some peace talks with the Biwukik, a hostile tribe that can still be reasoned with and may not have to be wiped out. Riding atop horses makes it a quick trip, and though the talks ultimately do flounder, they do at least inform Glenn that the trash chokers have been asking around for any mech controllers to use. Between the potential reprisal from the slavers themselves and the Biwukiks, it's time for some autocannons that don't do much against the bugs popping up inside. A bedroom is a terrible place for the fight, but the infestation is contained, and they again only cause some injuries taken care of in the hospital. Fights are going better now that they've actually got some decent weapons and armor, and so Murillo mounts a horse to go scout the slaver camp that they originally escaped from. Reitgard's goal remains retaking it, though there's a lot of enemies too. A dozen have industrial guns and are backed by turrets, and so Murillo leaves before they can realize that he's there. But despite that, the threat seems reasonable. Too much for now, sure, but not too much for too much longer. What settlement continues scaling up, adding autocannon turrets and making ever more components? Some are turned into prosthetics to try and help those that have suffered more serious injuries, though it does take a couple of tries. And since roving out to deal with the camp seems like it might be in the nearish future, Glenn even begins stockpiling packaged meals that store better and don't rot. Ola is inspired to recruit more soldiers for this mission, though the next person that arrives isn't much of a combatant. Still, Feedy is a great doctor that can fix up the soldiers, and she's also a talented crafter that's happy to contribute. She will still have to help in the military, but only after she's healed, so she doesn't join the others in taking up arms when raiders arrive by transport pod, but are sent back off in a hellacious rain of fire. She also isn't sent out to a raider camp in the desert, obliterated to both stop their encroachment and to convince the Empire to send some potent Glitterworld medicine as a reward. She has to join up to defend from a counterattack from the slavers themselves, angry at what we're doing. The turret tries to take them down, but they're too close and lob grenade after grenade, while Feedy and Vilayov fire away. The two are the only soldiers here, and Tox grenades make sure it is a teary and nasty affair. Though the turrets do little damage, they distract the enemies long enough that the pair keep the base safe, and Feedy will be getting commendations for her work. Without her, Vilayov would have been alone, and everything might have been undone. Hands still shaky from combat cause her to fail to install Vilayov's new prosthetic leg, just like Reitgard. And the stress about both that and not fitting in leads to a mental break that honestly just means she fits in all the better. The apparently neurotic inventor goes straight to digging up corpses to put on the dinner table. Converting her to ensure that she's a little bit happier here seems like a good idea, and she does eventually settle in nicely. The front entrance is built out so that enemies can't charge to the west out of the turret's cone of fire, though the mechs that arrive shortly after are too smart for that. They kill innocent travelers, then rain fire down on the back wall, blowing through it and filling the generator room in flames. Shooting back out between the holes in the wall takes time that lets the raging fire destroy not just the base's power supply, but the fabrication bench needed to make components. What settlement needs the better weapons now denied to them, and instead face setbacks and infections necessitating bed rest that keep stymieing the base's attempts to grow strong while time continues ticking away. They aren't even trying to do anything crazy, like go to space. Although I do hear that space has its own set of problems. If you want to take a turn at handling those, check out the sponsor of this video, Spaaaaace. It is a sci-fi colony sim that takes place amongst the stars. You'll use drones and your human colonists to grow a starship, using what you scavenge, craft, and reprocess. Set up winches to cannibalize scattered chunks of derelict ships you come across, prepare for combat when raiders board your ship, and send your colonists out on expeditions to harvest what you need so that you can survive space's harsh vacuum. You'll use your drones to automate resource chains and need to consider each colonist's traits and stats to get the most out of them as you jury-rig your ship to explore the cosmos looking for a habitable world your colonists can call home. The game has a demo you can play for free, and just received a large update focusing on space travel and new events a few days before this video went live. Use my link in the pinned comment to check the Steam page out and give it a try. While being rebuilt, the new area is also converted into a bit of a garage, with a bench to make vehicles for when they can rove out further. Though the one I've set my eye on would take thousands of steel and man hours that just can't be afforded, when they still have to cannibalize research benches just to get power back up and running so that they can eat food. Some wandering stragglers are helped out, and Gynacomb leaves to help the Empire in exchange for a book. It's not quite the traders and advanced components they need, but the crafters that are left need time to make jackets to sell for them anyways. Time marches ever on, and spring arrives despite little progress being made through the snowy winter. Though that doesn't stop them from enjoying the yearly festival of fun and starting the 4th year here with reaffirmed beliefs. They know that they're halfway through the mission and 0 raider camps have fallen. Another round of mechs arrive, and while they normally wouldn't be too hard to clean up, one of the stragglers is given the only EMP launcher to help in the fight, but promptly decides to leave. They say the danger's too much, but that both makes the actual fight much harder without the stun gun, and gets them brutally slaughtered out front. The soldiers have to ignore the sounds of their screams from behind cover that lets them deal with these short-ranged mechs. And while not having the launcher makes right guard angry enough he throws a tantrum that lasts just seconds before he gets shot, the soldiers advance up the sides and pick them off from cover. Still, progress remains slow. The next trader only has one of the needed 2 advanced components to remake the fabrication bench, and so right guard instead turns to Anverson's nearby settlement. He heads out atop a horse with a litany of outfits to both trade and offer as gifts. They're worth quite a bit that he spends on advanced components and the gold and plasteel to make more back home, as well as some drugs needed to make better medicine. The last outfits are freely given to even build a little bit of rapport. When he returns, the advanced components that he's bought are used on a fabrication bench that allows them to start making more themselves. These take quite a bit of materials and time, but they're the key to handle everything in the future. Fortunately, the next problem that arises is a mech encampment that only threatens the base with a fog generator, so while it does have a high shield, right guard can wait for it to need to be recharged and mortar the place. The mechs are weakened and forced to charge soldiers in heavy cover, though the battle still is intense because everyone's seemingly unable to hit a single mech right in front of them that isn't even in cover until after it destroys an autocannon. But the job is eventually done, and turrets are cleared with only meager issues. We need the advanced weapons that advanced components entail, and the safety that those will afford will certainly be the tipping point in the wars to come. But though there's been a long lull, progress finally begins speeding up. Vilayov's lost leg is fixed with a prosthetic on the 3rd try. Traders sell more and more of what's needed to make yet more advanced components, which then enables crafters to look at the most powerful armor in the game. It's promising, and right guard is even confident enough to go offer more gifts to Anverson, even if their trip involves having to teach a raider scout that confronting a mounted man with an assault rifle isn't ideal when you're only armed with a knife. Advanced components allow crafters to make yet more advanced weapons back home, including the first charge rifles, though they aren't needed for the next mech-guarded ship that arrives, and the mechs can be drawn out and sniped down 1 or 2 at a time. Even the slavers that try to follow up on the attack are easily gunned down in the marsh. This tide is rising, turning. They've amassed advanced components and continue sending out Right Guard to trade for more. He even negotiates a proper alliance with Anvirson. The research tree is mostly finished, and work continues adding more upgraded weapons to their arsenal. These charge rifles have less range than the assault rifles they kind of replace, but pack a lot more of a punch. The first would-be test isn't much of one, because the enemies never really get close into the medium range that charge rifles excel at, but that's kind of a reassuring result all the same. Even better is that one of the survivors is a potentially useful soldier that excels at melee combat. They're captured and nursed through an infection because it's something that what settlement has been lacking this entire time. Hunting continues relentlessly to fill the pantry as quickly as hungry mouths can deplete it. Traders brave the storm and winters chill to bring goods needed for yet more advanced components, as well as news of camps that some pirates set up nearby. 11 enemies are scary, but since that's what they'll face at the raider camps they seek to destroy, and the reward is a masterwork sniper rifle, almost everyone, including both the non-combatants Glenn and Ola, goes to head there. It leaves the new guy back to tend to the base and immediately raid the pantry, but either way, the home front is technically not dormant. The enemy's fortress is small. It must be a new encroachment. Glenn gives everyone a rousing speech to help them in combat all the same, because they are not taking any chances. Everyone advances to cover and readies themselves for a brutal fight the enemies arrive to offer. It isn't long before the sand is drowned in blood, while everyone dodges Molotovs and grenades as best they can. It is a scrappy affair, and almost everyone gets some moderate wounds for it, but the raiders are eventually gunned down until the last two survivors flee into harsh deserts even less merciful than Reckard's finest, who flex by napping in front of them. They take some loot to sell for the trouble, though it is much less useful than the sniper rifle waiting for them back home. Even Vilayov's best aren't nearly as good as this beast of a weapon. But more importantly than even the rewards is the accomplishment. This was the first real hurdle, showing that they can handle even the larger number of raiders found at the stronger camps they'll be setting their eyes on soon. It has taken 4 years to get here, and they'll need more armor if they want to not fill the hospital every time they come home, but it is in view. Enemies arrive to try and finish off the injured. The mortars they use to avoid the swamp are able to be taken out by what settlement's shots before they can threaten the mountain home. They're forced to charge, and the ranged soldiers are so injured that they have to rely on trickery. Kinfok and Ganacombe sneak out the back and ambush those with longer ranged rifles to distract them. They do take some fire for the trouble, but survive, and the close-range enemies who charge past die without covering fire. There's even another excellent melee soldier able to be captured and converted, prompting new bedrooms to need to be built for the first time in a long while. Still, they do not have time to recover. A mech cluster arrives in the following sunrise, marking 3 attacks in just 4 days. Luckily, it doesn't activate immediately, and a roof placed over the mortar will stop it from shooting. That means the remaining mechs can be sniped off with safe hit-and-run tactics that spare injured soldiers trips back to the hospital, but it takes the Empire's trading caravan wandering nearby to finish off the rest in a far more violent show. Spring's arrival helps the last snow thaw, but it's proper recon armor that everyone looks forward to instead. A full set costs 4 advanced components and 100 plasteel, but it is some of the strongest armor and has no drawbacks. It'll take constant trading ships and a lot of goods to trade to afford what's needed, but Reckard wants everyone to have it to keep them safe when missions drag them all about the world. Though they easily handle an ineffective prison break, there's little that can be done about the toxic fallout that soon swarms the base. Everyone that stays outside too long will be ravaged by it, though it also means that some rescued crash pod victims join up instead of venturing into the green haze, and that more travelers come beg for safety. The yearly party welcomes them and marks just 2 years left. It's going to be close at best, but they're almost able to hopefully steamroll the opposition. Since it'll be needed before too long, they begin working on car parts that'll cost over 1,000 steel and tons of components. But the Wisent, a large truck fit for carrying a slew of soldiers, will make the trips much faster and safer. 30 to 50 feral rabbits arrive and give the new line of melee soldiers their first test. The newcomers bear the brunt of their presumably not that ferocious bites, while the others shoot past them masterfully. The test passed, they're welcomed properly, which is a stark contrast to the mechs that follow them, though these don't seem to have an actual threat that necessitates focusing on them, so they're ignored while Vileov works on more recon armor instead. Managing the basics of the base through this toxic storm is rough. The pantry's been emptied, the animals are starving, and even those slaughtered are oft too irradiated to be edible. The horses that are alive are diseased, and it's not clear that any will survive. The fallout does at least stop trickling down as spring's end nears. It's destroyed the local area, and restocking the pantry is going to be rough. To make matters worse, some traders even trigger the mechs that have been ignored till now and send them at the door. Taking these in a fair fight would be brutal because they're better at range and much tankier than the last waves, and so a cunning plan sends melee soldiers at the bunch in time with a mortar shot that misses the mark and leaves them woefully exposed. Two get away, but Witchrian tastes the swamp. The thin silver lining is that it buys time for gunmen to take the beefier enemies out, letting them charge the last ones and finish them off before dealing with the final turrets and officially ending the threat. The advanced guns used on those also make quick work of the noble thrumbos, which helps alleviate the ailing pantries. But they're once more put to the test when yet more mechs arrive before Witchrians even recovered. The other melee soldiers ambush ranged mechs and do a good job until another wave comes from around the corner and sears their skin. Mononate does better and continues wailing on them until a single bullet batters through their helmet and kills them on the spot, marking the first death in a long while. The rest of the mechs are able to be cleaned up from behind cover, but too many of the soldiers are under-armored for the threats they face, and Kinfok bleeds out soon after despite the best care they have. Funerals spread out over a couple of days provide bits of closure. It steals their resolve, and they insist on making stronger armor now. Those setbacks mean that though the truck is built, it can't actually be used just yet. And the delay grows longer still when a flu spread at the recent funeral hits colonists hard. Hands shaky from the sickness mean missed shots let a lynx maul Feedy. A nastier infection gets her and outpaces treatment. Without many options, she has to be carried off to a biosculptor pod built for an emergency just like this. It will save her, but it's also going to incapacitate her for a few days, which is worth it, but time just keeps ticking. Progress is slowed, but it continues nonetheless. Miniguns are unlocked, and the expensive but powerful weapons of mass carnage begin being made. The Wisent is even put through its paces when it helps ferry soldiers out to deal with a mech cluster guarding a psychic suppressor. The EMP launcher carries the day, although a little bit of friendly fire mean the interior of the truck is ruined all the same. And then it has to be left outside when it came back on the wrong side of the marsh and they need a bridge to be built. That warranty is definitely getting voided. Raiders that saw the vehicle on the open road follow it back to try and ambush them, but they're spotted, mortared, and then shot to ribbons. These fights seem to bounce back and forth between being fairly easy to handle and very brutal, depending on who takes their fire and a little bit of luck. Those without the better armor are always at risk, and it prompts Reichgard to continue heading out on horseback for the biggest trade yet, used to acquire even more armor as everyone hopes for a set. The gear upgrades and orders for more stack up as fall deepens. Once one last order set is done, everyone will be ready. When a quest arrives that could help speed that process up, they jump on it. Witchrian learned from their earlier failure in the swamp and now stands as the lone melee soldier left alive. The injuries they weather in their thick armor aren't bad, and he's rewarded with the extra durable marine armor. Perhaps it's rumors about the advanced armor-clad soldiers going out again and again that prompts the Bewookics to ask for peace talks. They draw Glenn and Murillo out, because anything that might stop the almost unending tides of mechs is worth pursuing, but those talks once again fail, and there is more trouble to pay for it. A preemptive barrage of high explosives is followed by sending everyone, including a Witchrian who decides to start yelling at people, which leads to a social fight at the worst time, right as a beautiful EMP lands, and the others peek out to eliminate them. Although, given how frequently melee soldiers get friendly fired and used as bait, perhaps Witchrian's not totally in the wrong here. It does take a little bit, but a minigun shreds shields with its barrage of bullets, and let even the biggest of mechs be gunned down without causing more than a few very minor grievous injuries that'll keep the hospital full and the Wyzant's engine cold a little longer. These delays refuse to subside, and it's not like there's anything that'll improve the mood issues that seem to be causing them in the future. Mountains are mined out for useful steel veins now that all the more easily accessed ones are gone, and that supplies what's needed for more and more sets of armor that might alleviate the injuries sustained in every fight. The penultimate winter arrives, bringing a chill that slows travel and prompts Vilyov to turn to alternative methods for staying warm. That fire and the heaters seem to drive more bugs, though the single wide tunnel they get trapped in lets pawns fire past Witchrian somehow, and the day is won after a slog of a fight that sends them to the hospital. The armor's worn down, but the injuries beneath aren't actually that bad, despite being worryingly numerous. Vilyov has had enough. They know better than almost anyone just how close the end of their timetable is. One last work frenzy to finish the last orders. One building project to link a geothermal generator to a hydroponics bay to help grow food through the winters. Everyone is geared, and so as soon as they recover from their wounds, the truck is loaded. Supplies are carried to it, and 6 fully geared soldiers drive off to attack the same camp Murillo scouted what seems so long ago. They're somehow ambushed by some animals they have to put down, and 2 imps on foot later. I don't think they realize they can just drive away. They do eventually arrive in the dead of winter and set their sights on the mining camp that Murillo, Reichgard, and Glend were interned at some 5 years prior. They leave the Wyzant hidden in the depths of night, find cover behind boulders, and announce that the raiders' kind are no longer welcome here with a few shots. Their enemies charge back, but Witchrian intercepts them and lets the others gun down enemies that have to wade through a hellacious wave of bullets. The slushy ground is quickly covered in slaver blood. Their return fire can't land any critical injuries against tough armor, and the day is eventually won. It was a little shaky, sure, but it was still a stride and a half towards their ultimate goal of cleansing the continent, and their wounds are joyous battle scars. Once tended on the spot, everyone eventually crawls back into the car and returns to What Settlement, where worried faces melt with relief after seeing them and hearing of the victory. But with just over a year left, there are still 13 hostile settlements around the world that will not know peace. The Wyzant is repaired, the hospital is used to help those who took a few injuries, and building projects are tackled to keep the soldiers fed, all while spring nears. There are about 5.5 days left per settlement that needs to fall, but injured soldiers are easily killed soldiers. A single loss would be disastrous at this point. We don't just need wins, we need clean wins. Mechs would normally be a messy affair, but a few EMP mortars let the pod that would spawn most of them be sniped down, while the small mechs are kited off and the big ones are ambushed. There are some minor injuries, but they don't have time to be healed off before Raider arrives to breach a hole I unintentionally left in the wall to let animals roam out for needed food. Without the normal cover and turrets to help, it is a brutal affair, and while no one dies, everyone picks up far worse injuries. Feedy's infection even got away from her in the midst of it all, forcing her back into the biosculptor pod to save her life yet again. Worse, the Wyzant stays cold. The snow is thawing, and the final year nears, but these injuries hold them back still. They try to keep themselves busy improving their defenses by planting Devil Strand to make stronger clothes neath their armor, making a portable shield belt to help Witchery weather enemy fire, and making a deployable shield to break out in case of emergency. It's productive, yes, but there's still an unease in the air as work buys just enough time for everyone to heal up, then get ready to ship off to another raider base in the area. It is a staging ground in the center of the continent to help project their forces all about. The foes there notice the truck early and greet them with a mortar shot that's just barely avoided by flooring it. The soldiers rush to cover while Witchery prepares in the nearby rock face and ambushes foes that try to use it. He advances, using his new shield belt to weather shots, buying time for the others to push forward and lay down fire while their snipers can't. It doesn't take long to send the foes to the ground far more cleanly than before. Only Witchery took any real injuries, and even they're more bruised than in any real danger. They're cared for as the turrets are destroyed, and the place is liberated. When raiders next caravan here for a resupply, they'll find only a stark message in the well-fed vultures. The loot from these trips is really nice too, helping them buy supplies from traders that make up for the work that doesn't get done while they're gone. But the other settlements they want to destroy are much further, meaning far more meals and fuel. Preparing those offers a few more days to craft high-quality weapons, and for Rightguard to physically assault Glen, which isn't a great look, but it isn't long before they head out to the next furthest slaver camp. And then immediately realize they still need to stop by Anvirson City to buy a little extra chem fuel I forgot to stock for the journey. After the little gas stop, the soldiers make good progress, and since the last place didn't get the chance to warn the slavers, they're caught unaware. They frantically charge closer in their panic and are easily gunned down. The bloody affair is quick, and the injuries minor enough that they even start feeling good about their chances against these later camps. The 6th year has started, sure, and while the camps they've killed have been closer, they're still starting to make remarkable progress. Waiting for good gear delayed actual tallies from being added up, but it kept them safe and means that they now add them quickly enough for it to maybe be possible. What downtime they do have involves preparing more meals for the road trips as summer arrives. It also allows more surgeries, like giving Murillo a bionic eye to replace the one he lost in combat years ago, to make and then install a healing implant in Witchery to reduce how long he's out of the fight since he's the group's tank, and to get more food that's both grown and arrives to the settlement on its own terms. Once healing's done and food is stocked in the truck, another trip leaves, this time without Murillo, so that he can continue tending the plants back home. Keeping things productive here, as forces are abroad, is key to supplying them with everything they need and letting them stay active. Once they arrive, the soldiers find a group of savage imps with less advanced weapons, but with flame breaths. Witchery baits them out and dodges out of the way, but more still douse the gunners in flames and force them back. Their view's obscured, but their heavy weapons and armor let them weather enemy shots and kill foes in turn. The fire left behind will burn down their village and make sure even the stragglers that get away and leave can't return to terrorizing others. Since the soldiers are still fairly healthy, they turn the tires towards another raider settlement instead of returning home. What injuries they do have will make this harder, but it'll also speed things up and mean that the timeline is possible. The drive's safe, and they come upon beastmen with a mix of decent weaponry and throwables that prove to be a problem in the middling cover. It's hard to kill them, and Witchery is bogged down by shots, while their animals flood around the rocks to charge and distract shooters. That only further slows killing them down, and bad becomes worse as injuries start to stockpile. It is a bloody affair, made even more difficult because the few scrapes they picked up earlier mean that they are now more easily cowed. Those at home are attacked too, and since there are just 2 soldiers that can't possibly fight back all on their own, Viliov heads to the comm console and asks Anvirson for aid. They're our allies, and they appreciate what we're doing on the world stage, so they send a platoon of soldiers that get in position. Back at the enemy village, the fight is finally won, and the camp is razed to the ground so that they can pile into the car and head home in a dreary and weary haze. Summer's halfway done, and they've got some 3 seasons left before time is up, but their injuries are proof of what happens when you rush. Reitgard tells the Luda to stop on the way home, wherein Viersen successfully protected the village from its threats, and that everyone left has stockpiled plenty of meals for the rest of the trips as soon as they're healed up. While time lets those wounds heal, they hunt to further balance out the pantry and quote-unquote defend an Empire ship from a bunch of savages. Fortunately, the Empire still likes the work we've done enough to consider us allies despite this piss-poor job, which means that they too will come to our help when we're attacked while the soldiers are abroad. They ship out a few days later and head out on a long drive to the far east of the continent for a lone settlement there. It'll be the longest trip yet, and Warren apparently dislikes being left relatively unguarded for so long, and so does the only logical thing and digs up corpses. Why is it always grave robbing with these people? Feedy is not doing much better. She doesn't head off to missions because of her bad back, which slows her down and makes her a liability in combat, but she had to help in the last fight, and recovery is taking a long time. Vilayov lashes out in his own way. He's not even mad, he just likes setting fires to the devil strand that has been patiently growing since the ground thawed, and that immediately goes up in flames before anyone can stop it. That is about the second worst place to light a fire, and once it's done burning, the most ironic time for rain. The long trip ends after a few days. The winter's arrival back home is marked by a mech counterattack launched by raiders that saw the soldiers leaving again. They simply don't understand that Viersen believes in us enough to help yet again, even though it is a bloody fight that leaves some of them dead. That frees worries from soldiers who fight vicious imps, and though fire once more lights up the night to leave soldiers with burns that Reitgard will nurse on the way home, the day is won. Word about what we're doing spreads, and even the usually hostile folk, like the Popult Mix, are up to a solid neutral. The trip back has Reitgard playing the same song on repeat for the entire drive, but despite mood problems, they only stay for a day before heading back out again. There's just over half a year left, and winter will slow their travel a good chunk. Their journey to the west is uneventful, and they arrive at the difficult-to-assault mountainous facility in the midst of fall. The soldiers might have good cover, but Witchrian is forced to be exposed and takes lots of shots their shield depletes absorbing. More fire sends them to the ground yet again, and enemies flood past, leaving the soldiers riddled with injuries before they just barely manage to kill enough that raiders flee soon after. If they'd arrived here in less than their excellent gear, they would have definitely lost friends and maybe even the whole war. The prudence in making sure they're well equipped means that the timeline is tight, but I think it might be the only way that this is possible. They're unfortunately unable to visit another enemy settlement and instead have to return home to heal. But though there are problems, the normally hostile Popmoiks are starting to get the idea and betraying raiders they used to partner with. That alone is worth rewarding by doing their mission. And the legendary assault rifle they also offer just makes that deal sweeter. They pile back into the car and head to the nearby raider site instead of one of their settlements. Yet another attack hits while they're gone, prompting worries that the Popmoiks aren't as friendly as they're seeming to be, but allies again handle the problem. Upkeeping relations is supposed to be hard, especially when you summon them this much, but the good work being done about the world handles it, and that means that soldiers are free to focus on the mission ahead and gun down enemies charging at them through the forest. They do have to dodge a Molotov and take some light fire for the trouble, but the problem is dealt with spectacularly, and the rewards when they return home will only make them an even stronger fighting force. The base has been productive through it all too. They're at 142 packaged meals, plus the dozens and dozens in the truck itself. A bunch of Sensite mechanoids hit again, enhancing half the colonist's skills, but giving them some crippling pain. Though people keep happy by throwing parties and celebrating as snow starts to fall. Since that is a sign that time is ticking by even while they relax, the party is cut early and they once more leave tire tracks in the snow to attack a pair of settlements in the west. The horse population has been recovering nicely after the toxic fallout thinned them, though they're only going to be used for an emergency supply run because the truck saves so much time traveling and is now the only hope for doing it in 6 years. Vilayov responds to that stress by lighting more fires in even worse spots. The carefully stockpiled mortars are lit up and burn for only moments before they explode, ruining both the shells and the mortars themselves. At least the mission looks good. The area is a mess, but the enemies have short-ranged weapons and are forced into the open. Soldiers constantly retreat back while mowing down enemies and only take one minor injury before the whole lot of them are killed, and the group packs up to head for the other raiders' settlements. I don't know if that was more of Vilayov's fun or some of the incendiary shells, but half the hospital's gone. The second settlement the soldiers attack is again in the desert, even if the harsh sun won't beat down for another few hours. The scattered boulders make for another scrappy fight, and their incendiary launchers force soldiers back. That kiting prevents worse injuries though, and though it slows them down a little bit, the enemies are gunned down in the midst of their advances. The days won far more cleanly than the last time they took on 2 places in a row, a sign of better tactics, better gear, and their growing experience with the weapons. Vilayov isn't in a good mood because they're forced to clean up the mess they made in the hospital, and they don't finish there before soldiers return. Still, the rising tide of vengeance that what settlement represents deserves a celebration in the form of a brilliant and beautiful statue, plus pillars that liven up the already impressive rec room. But it isn't all sunshine and cleaning the blood off their boots. More mechanites infect some of the soldiers, meaning some of them are in medium pain at all times now. So they will go down much more easily, but are faster and stronger for it. It's not the worst trade-off, but it does mean the last fights are going to be tense. The soldiers ignore that risk and leave for the far south. Of the 5 settlements left to raise, 2 lay near the tip of the continent some few days travel away. A counterattack they've learned to expect by now is once again handled by Anbierson's finest, or what's left of them since so many have died here. But those at home also accept psychic suppression in return for some bionic parts that might allow surgery that keeps soldiers in the fight. Though I admittedly only did this because I thought it would slightly ruin moods and not have their productivity. They continue working in the snow to keep mouths fed, even though the soldiers in the southern hemisphere find the ground thawed as they arrive before winter ends. Between digits that aren't frigid any longer and the mechanites helping steady their shots, they slaughter their foes. This is the last bastion of the trash chokers that kept Murillo, Right Guard, and Glenn slaves so long ago. The threat of death loomed over them every night for years, but now the shoes on the other foot, and the boot on the other throat. They come away with little more than a few token injuries and some teary eyes to show for it, then head off to the other settlement on the way back home. The beastmen there have more tech than expected, including a deployable shield and snipers, but they just can't deal with the advanced recon and marine armor that lets our soldiers shrug off their shots. It's a luxury the enemies don't have, and the long trip home begins. Spring arrives before they do. The base is an absolute pigsty as the psychic suppressor slows work, and who's available spends their time preparing for one final trip out. The 6th year is over on the 11th, and there is just enough time to drive home, then out to the last raider settlements. People want our help, but the soldiers have to instead head to the psychic suppressor instead of heading straight back home. The lone gunmen and turrets guarding it, plus the swampy land around it, slow them down, while Anbierson's soldiers are once more forced into harrowing tunnels to fight off a new infestation. It leaves a mess, but the home is safe and soldiers return there on the wrong side of the mountain. They start mining a path for it to drive back to the garage, but they're going to be leaving before long in the last few days. The timeline is maybe still possible. Not now. Witchrian's awful mood makes him start binging drugs and overdose, and Warren starts shouting about not getting a window seat. Going without them would doom a trip that already asked them to take 3 fights in a row without breaks for the first time. And so as much as we wanted to accomplish this goal, the strict timeline just isn't realistic. The travel time alone would put things right up against the wall. And we were close, but winter's travel hardships, time spent healing, and a few bad moods that delayed things just cost too much time. A yearly celebration meant to cap everything off, instead boost spirits alongside a new masterwork charge lance that's got mediocre DPS but incredible stopping power. With that though, moods are fixed, and so the most people, everyone but Glenn and Feedy who stay behind to tend to the base, gather their supplies and set out as the 11th. The 6-year mark passes. They've barely left before mechs arrive, but the sunblocker is fairly easy to ignore, while they instead continue work in case Glenn has to ride out with more supplies in tow. Fortunately, the remaining foes are imps, and while they're dangerous if they can get close enough to breathe fire, the swamps we're at home in mean that it is easy to bait them across it and slaughter them without taking much in the way of damage. They pack up and head to the second of the 3 foes here in the western lands before long. While they travel, another mechanoid cluster near the settlement doubles down on that whole no sunlight allowed thing, but that is a problem for later. The second stop on the trip also has a marsh to kite across, though the enemies realize and go around instead. That still leaves them with little cover to advance through, splits them up, and lets them be shot to absolute ribbons by weapons more advanced than their flimsy gear can hope to handle. There is only one more obstacle, one more settlement until the world is free from their grip. Those at home spruce up the temple with some new flooring, while the sun rises on the adventurers out on the western tip of the world. The last vestiges of violence live in a desert, which is less conducive to fighting them, but the terrain itself isn't bad. The soldiers set up opposite a canyon, where Witrian acts as bait to keep them in the open, and allows guns to slaughter them where the sands swallow up every ounce of blood. And that is all of them. The world is free of those that can't be reasoned with, and everyone, even those close to raiders themselves, love this work that has been done. It took 7 days too long for the goal, confirming that they wouldn't have handled it even without the last-minute mood problems before they could set out, but the duty is, at least, done. Soldiers return home and unload before setting their sights on cleaning up the remnants of the mechs the raiders sicked here. A good shot prompts an explosion that takes out most of them. The rest are kited out and the job is finished safely. That frees everyone up to head to the other mech installation blocking the sun. And though the fight is much sloppier against turrets that unleash hellfire, the advanced weapons and a deployable shield they'd stockpiled this entire time let them chew up the enemy metal and ultimately clear the sky once more so that they can return home to another mech group. Just how many of these did the trash chokers send off before they died? While setting up, Anviersen's caravan makes a mess of it, and even take an accidental shot that they almost announce what settlement for. But peace is finally won, and everyone gathers in the newly refurbished temple to celebrate achieving their goal. It's not quite the victory they wanted, since it's about a season late, but the world is rid of its worst dregs. That is the end of What Settlement and this journey though. I'm still acclimating to Rimworld, but I'm having a blast with it and already have plans for another video where everyone is permanently stuck at 1 health. If you like the sound of that, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you like this video, which I hope you do if you're still around this late into it, drop it a like and check out some of my other Rimworld or Dwarf Fortress content visible on screen. Thank you again to Paradox Arc for sponsoring this video. Make sure to check Spaaaaace out using my link in the pinned comment.